Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. Today, the module which we are going to discuss is Agenda 21 and Rio Plus 20. To discuss this module, it is very important to understand what is the interrelationship between environment and development. The world around, that is, all the developed and developing countries came together on a common platform to discuss and solve the issues related with environment and development, which culminated into a long conference, thus giving the world a standard set of principles and working policies for the enforcement and implementation of the environment related aspects and clear solution to the environment related problems. The learning objectives of this module will be understanding the Rio Declaration on Environment and Development, in-depth study of principles adopted at Agenda 21 and study of the United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development or Rio 20. To start with, I would like to discuss a brief introduction or an outline of how the Agenda 21 and Rio Plus 20 culminated. The 1992 UN Conference on Environment and Development, or as it is better known, the Rio Earth Summit, is symbolic of the international solidarity that the world showed in the face of deteriorating environmental conditions. When the nature was crying out for sustainable development, the Earth Summit was the first such monumental stature conference which had representatives of 172 countries, including 108 heads of state and government, coming together over 12 days of negotiations. It is very important to understand that 172 countries in which the heads or the representatives of 108 countries were there, they all came together for 12 days and discussed intensively the issue of environment. The event garnered the attention of the world media at an unprecedented scale. The event can also be hailed as a game changer in the context of international relations when, after the bitterness that has snowballed into Cold War was kept aside for a while and the nations came together with a common target of sustainable development. The summit resulted in a series of crucial decisions that emerged in the form of unbinding principles that form the foundation stone of the international environmental solidarity that the world witnessed, that is Agenda 21. Agenda 21 proclaimed a particularly noble purpose, one intended to inspire generations. Agenda 21 proclaimed a particularly noble purpose, that is, intending to inspire generations. As humanity stands at a defining moment of history, Agenda 21 sought to address the pressing problems of today and to prepare the world for the challenges of the next century. Now, since the crucial environmental problems addressed at the Earth Summit in 1992, many changes had taken place across the globe, and it was time for some serious stock taking at the situation. That is, after the Earth Summit in 1992, the countries felt the need that they should have a conference in order to see the developments that have been taking place in the countries as per the principles that were adopted in the Earth Summit of 1992, and this gave rise to Rio Plus 20 after a gap of 20 years. By this conference, UN wanted to bring together governments, international institutions and major NGO groups to agree on a range of smart measures for number 1, poverty reduction, number 2, clean energy, number 3, sustainable development. And this sustainable development had 3 pillars. Number 1, economic development, number 2, social development and environmental production. Now, as we are again and again saying that the world wanted sustainable development. So, what is sustainable development? This answer the answer to this question is very clear and can be answered in very simple terms. I would like to explain you through an example. That is, if a son and a child is going in a car and the father keeps the engine on while standing on a red light for 1 minute. The son objects to the same and says, Papa, if you're going to use the entire energy, or if you're going to use all the sources at this time, what will be left for me in future? This is sustainable development. That is, using the present resources in such a manner that they are left for the future generations as well. The two major core themes decided at the Rio +20. After understanding the concept of sustainable development, let us move forward to the core themes of the Rio +20. The two major core themes decided at the Rio +20 were a green economy in the context of sustainable development and poverty eradication, and number 2, institutional framework for sustainable development. Now coming to a very important discussion, that is, what was India's stand at Rio +20, or what did India put forth in front of the world community at Rio +20, or what were the problems that India was facing after the Earth Summit 1992. India voiced very strongly that it advocated at Rio +20 for a non-binding legal commitment and no predetermined targets for sustainable development. It said that if there are targets, they cannot be achieved so easily because environment is not that easy to understand. As being a developing country, for effective sustainable development, effective mobilization of appropriate resources is also required to effectively carry out the aim of sustainable development. India said that the related concerns were voiced by India at Rio +20, and the concerns which were voiced by India were: number 1, as most environment friendly green technologies are with the developed country, Rio +20 should facilitate the transfer of these technologies from developed countries to developing countries on concessional terms, or we can say that at reasonable rates. India also said that there should be early operationalization of the Niyoga Protocol for access to genetic resources and the fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from their utilization. India also advocated for creation of a sustainable development fund for providing finances to the developing countries. To summarize, we can say that India wanted or asked for adequate flow of resources and technologies to developing countries. This was about Rio +20, which took place after the Earth Summit, but prior to this, a very important event has also taken place in which there was a consensus which was reached among the world leaders on the impact of human activity on Mother Nature, which resulted in the formulation of 27 principles which form a part of Agenda 21. On 22nd December 1989, the United Nations General Assembly called for a global meeting that would devise strategies to halt and reverse the effect of environmental degradation in the context of increased national and international efforts to promote sustainable and environmentally sound development in all countries. Agenda 21, adopted by the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development on 14 June 1992, is the international community's response to that request. It is a comprehensive program of action to be implemented from now and into the 21st century. This was what was adopted at Agenda 21. And this program has to be implemented and adopted by governments, development agencies, United Nations organizations, and independent sector groups in every area where human activity affects the environment. The program should be studied in conjunction with the Rio Declaration on Environment and Development and the Principles for the Sustainable Management of Forest. The program was adopted as the conference known as the Earth Summit, which was held from 3 to 14 June 1992 in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. The major principles adopted at Agenda 21 are as under, which we are going to discuss one by one. Principle 1, which was adopted at Agenda 21, is human beings are at the center of concern for sustainable development. They are entitled to a healthy and productive life in harmony with nature. It says that though human beings are at the center of all the developments, but there should nothing be done by the humans which should bring about a disbalance in the environment. Principle 2 stated that states have, in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations and the principle of international law, the sovereign right to exploit their own resources pursuant to their own environmental and development policies, and the responsibility to ensure that activities within their jurisdiction or control do not cause damage to the environment of other states or of areas beyond the limits of national jurisdiction. So, Principle 2 very clearly states that though all the nations in the world community are sovereign and have the right to exploit their natural resources in a way they consider to be convenient, but they have to keep in mind that they cannot exploit the resources in such a manner that it causes harm to the other countries of the world. Principle 3 states that the right to development must be fulfilled so as to equitably meet developmental and environmental needs of present and future generation. So, Principle 3 very clearly talks about sustainable development. Principle 4 says that in order to achieve sustainable development, which is laid down in Principle 3, environmental protection shall constitute an integral part of the development process and cannot be considered in isolation from it. It very clearly says that for sustainable development, environmental protection has to be kept in mind. Principle 5 states that all states and all people shall cooperate in the essential task of eradicating poverty as an indispensable requirement for sustainable development. In order to decrease the disparities in standards of living and better meet the needs of the majority of the people of the world. It means that there should be eradication of poverty, because without that the world community cannot come at a common platform. Principle 6 lays down the special situation and needs of developing countries, particularly the least developed and those most environmentally vulnerable shall be given special priority, and international actions in the field of environment and development should also address the interests and needs of all countries. So, as per Principle 6, the developing or the least developed countries were given importance. In Principle 7, it was stated that states shall cooperate in a spirit of global partnership to conserve, protect, and restore the health and integrity of the Earth's ecosystem. In view of the different contributions to global environmental degradation, states have common but differential responsibilities. The developed countries acknowledge the responsibility that they bear in the international pursuit of sustainable development in view of the pressures their societies place on the global environment and of the technologies and financial resources they command. Principle 8 talked about achieving sustainable development and a higher quality of life for all people. State should reduce and eliminate unsustainable patterns of production and consumption and promote appropriate demographic policies. So, Principle 8 gives the responsibility to the states to reduce and eliminate unsustainable patterns of production. Principle 9 very clearly states that the world states should cooperate to strengthen endogenous capacity building for sustainable development by improving scientific understanding through exchange of scientific and technological knowledge. So, by principle 9, the scientific knowledge and technology should be exchanged among the world community. Principle 10 lays emphasis on environmental issues are best handled with the participation of all concerned citizens at the relevant level. So here, by principle 10, the individuals are also made a part for environmental protection and development. It says that, it further states that at the national level, each individual shall have appropriate access to information concerning the environment that is held by public authorities, including information on hazardous material and the opportunity to participate in decision-making process. It also lays stress on that states shall facilitate and encourage public awareness and participation by making information widely available. It also says that effective access to judicial and administrative proceedings, including redress and remedy, shall be provided. Principle 11 talks about that states shall enact effective environmental legislation. Environmental standards, management objectives and priorities should reflect the environmental and developmental context to which they apply. Standards applied by some countries may be inappropriate and of unwarranted economic and social cost to other countries, in particular developing countries. So, while adopting these standards, the countries have to be concerned about the other countries as well. Principle 12 says that states should cooperate to promote a supportive and open international economic system that would lead to economic growth and sustainable development in all countries to better address the problem of environmental degradation. Principle 12 further says that trade policy measures for environmental purposes should not form a means of arbitrary discrimination or a disguised restriction on international trade. Unilateral actions to deal with environmental challenges outside the jurisdiction of the importing countries should be avoided. Environmental measures addressing transboundary or global environmental problems should, as far as possible, be based on international consensus. Principle 13 further says that states shall develop national law regarding liability and compensation for the victims of pollution and other environmental damages. So, Principle 13 talks about a very important concern or a very important aspect of environmental protection, that is compensation to the victims of pollution. States shall also cooperate in an expeditious and more determined manner to develop further international law regarding liability and compensation for adverse effects of environmental damage caused by activities within the jurisdiction or control to areas beyond their jurisdiction, adds Principle 13. States should effectively cooperate to discharge or prevent the relocation and transfer to other states of any activities and substances that cause severe environmental degradation or are found to be harmful to human health, states Principle 14. That means the states, while transferring or while carrying any material which may cause serious damage to the environment and the human life, they should take all measures or all precautionary and concerned measures in order to safely transfer the same through the boundaries of the other states. Principle 15 says, in order to protect the environment, the precautionary approach shall be widely applied by states according to their capacities. Where there are threats of serious or irreversible damage, lack of full scientific knowledge certainly shall not be used as a reason for postponing cost-effective measures to prevent environmental degradation. As per Principle 16, national authorities should endeavor to promote the internalization of environmental cost and the use of economic instruments, taking into account the approach that the polluter should, in principle, bear the cost of pollution. Here, Principle 16 talks about polluter pays principle. Principle 17 says that environmental impact assessment as a national instrument shall be undertaken for proposed activity that are likely to have a significant adverse impact on the environment and are subject to a decision of a competent national authority. Principle 18 talks about that states shall immediately notify other states of any natural disaster or other emergencies that are likely to produce sudden harmful effect on the environment of those states. This means under Principle 18, the obligation is imposed on the states to inform the other states of any emergency or notify to them immediately if there is any adverse effect by an activity going to harm their interest as well. So those states who are involved in the particular phenomena should be immediately informed by the state, immediately informed by other states. Principle 19 says that states shall provide prior and timely notification and relevant information to potentially affected states on activities that may have a significant adverse transboundary environmental effect and shall consult with those states at an early stage and in good faith. So, as per Principle 18 and 19, early communication or communication to the potentially affected state should be given as early as possible of the same. Principle 20 says that women have a vital role in environmental management and development. Their full participation is therefore essential to achieve sustainable development. Principle 21 talks about the creativity, ideals and courage of the youth of the world, and it says that they should be mobilized to forge a global partnership in order to achieve sustainable development and ensure a better future for all. So, if we take into consideration Principle 20 and 21, two-folded responsibility has been laid on women and children under these principles, that women and youth under these principles, that they also are a part of carrying forward the aim of sustainable development. As per Principle 22, indigenous people and their communities and other local communities have a vital role in environmental management and development because of their knowledge and traditional practices. States should recognize and duly support their identity, culture and interest and enable their effective participation in the achievement of sustainable development. Principle 23 says that the environment and natural resources of people under operation, domination and occupation shall be protected. Principle 24 says that warfare is inherently destructive of sustainable development. If there is war, there will be destruction not only to the human life but also to the environment. States shall therefore respect international law providing protection for the environment in times of armed conflict and cooperate in its further development as necessary. Principle 25 further states that peace, development and environmental protection are interdependent and indivisible. That means that if there is peace, there will be development, and if there is peace and development, environment protection will occur on its own. Principle 26 further states that states shall resolve all the environmental disputes peacefully and by appropriate means in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations. Here, it is very important to understand that Charter of the United Nations in itself puts a ban or does not permit use of force. So, here in Principle 26, it is said that the disputes should be solved peacefully, because we have already seen in Principle 25 that peace, development and environmental protection are all interrelated and interdependent. Lastly, Principle 27 laid stress on that states and people shall cooperate in good faith and a spirit of partnership in the fulfillment of the principles embodied in this declaration and in the further development of international law in the field of sustainable development. So after going through the principles, we are very clear with one fact that the world community had a strong urge for environmental protection, because it was high time to realize that if the environment is not protected, human life cannot progress and cannot sustain. Beyond the mere awareness that Agenda 21 and the Rio Declaration brought for sustainable development worldwide, it also stimulated direct funding for projects in support of sustainable development. So, funding of projects was basically for the awareness and also making the people aware or bringing about a change or transformation in them that environmental protection is very important for human progress and development. To showcase a single example, in 1997, the World Bank published a paper tracking its grant and loans in furtherance of Rio's objectives during the 5-year period following the Earth Summit. That is, the progress made by the countries from 1992 to 1997 in order to bring about a sustainable development. And it was documented, or the study documented, the steady increase in projects targeting the improvement of environmental management. But despite this encouraging trend that has been enabled, environmental agreements where the traditional treaty process would have stood still, the spike of international commitments, however, has not been matched by either international implementing laws or capacity for enforcement. This clearly means that where the world organizations and the international community together was striving towards bringing about sustainable development, but individually, by seeing the national legislations, the enforcement mechanism of Agenda 21 was not at par with what the countries intended to at the meeting in 1992. A well-recognized implementation gap existed between goals recognized at the international level and the practical ability to attain those goals on the ground. Even with dedicated funds and attention to overcoming the implementation gap, there are long delays between the enactment of national legislations, its implementation, and the ultimate impact on environmental and development outcome in the country. And this fundamental shortcoming has been very well documented in the context of environmental impact assessment, that is EIA legislation. The Rio Declaration incorporated as Principle 17 a requirement to undertake an EIA for national activities that are likely to have a significant adverse impact on the environment. So EIA becomes very important, that is environmental impact assessment legislation. It has become very important after the report of the World Bank that the national legislations and what was intended at the Earth Summit in 1992 and the national legislations that are being framed, there is a huge gap in the implementation. And by 1998, it was seen that more than 100 countries had incorporated some form of EIA legislation. But a 2003 study diving deeper into implementation, however, found that most EIA systems in developing countries failed to meet a series of performance criteria. So there is still, till 2003, we can see that there is still a gap, or by the study of the 2003, we can see that there is still a huge gap or a big gap between what was intended and what is being implemented. To conclude, we can say that the Earth Summit did not fail to have impact, but it is only that the force of that impact and subsequent efforts has not been sufficient to reach a change in behavior at a sufficiently global scale. The pertinent question for Rio Plus 20 thus becomes how to recognize and account for the achievement gap and to streamline implementation in the future. Rio Plus 20 also had a question, in addition to the fulfilling of the achievement gap and streamlining implementation in the future, the additional burden was to what role this particular conference can play in reinforcing commitment or amplifying the effectiveness of ongoing efforts to advance sustainable development. Thus, It can be very well summed up that though the Earth Summit 1992 has brought a number of countries, that is 172 countries on the same platform, and had tried to bring about a global policy for sustainable development and environmental protection, but individually also all the nations in their national legislations have to try incorporating the goals of sustainable development and environmental protection in the same effective manner in which they have been achieved together by Earth Summit 1992. Thank you.